DNA and the importance of it, go back, stop right now, go to the video. We have it online. You can get it from our ministry, Jesus Christ, DNA, and the Holy Bible. And I'm going to revisit some information there. And I'm going to give you a little simple explanation of what DNA is all about. DNA, basically, as you probably know, every living creature in the universe, when we're all compacted down here to planet Earth, every living creature on Earth has DNA. It is a sequence of information. It looks like a double helix. It's two strands that are sort of rolled up together, and they contain the sequencing of everything that you and I are. If there are white people, black people, yellow people, brown people, if they have big hair, small hair, if they're tall, short, if they are male or female or whatever, that's all done according to the DNA. DNA is used in law enforcement. If someone commits a crime, chances are they're going to leave a little DNA at the crime scene. The crime scene people pick up on the DNA, they examine it, and now they have a unique fingerprint of who was at that scene, who did the murder. They know that because they can read the DNA. They do a sample of DNA from people that they suspect, and if the two codes match, then they know who did it. And so if I had, let me use this illustration here. Here is the current common King James Bible. Here is the 1611 King James Bible. They're identical. Now, some people say, oh, no, they've changed the Bible. No, they're identical in the words that they say. And so if I was at the scene of a crime and I had left this behind as my signature, and then they swabbed my mouth and took a DNA sample from me and compared this with this, they would say there's a 99% probability that this is the only guy living on the planet right now whose DNA matches what we found at the crime scene. Well, I was there, I'm guilty. That's how it works. Let me explain the adenine-guanine thing. Here you see up on the screen a picture. You remember this DNA thing. It looks like, well, it kind of looks like two snakes twisted together. We'll talk about that in some other Watchman broadcast. But if you uncoil it, it looks like a ladder. And the two strands of the DNA join together by what's called base pairs. Now, let me just kind of show you with my hands what this is. Here's the two strands of DNA, and there's only two here so far. And the two strands of DNA joined together, there would be a compound called adenine coming out from this side. And the rules are that adenine can only link in with thymine. And so if there's adenine on this side, there has to be thymine on this side, and they two join together perfectly. I'm going to show you this in the Bible. You'll like it. Then down here, let's say there's guanine here. Well, guanine can only latch on to cytosine. So if there's guanine now here, there has to be cytosine here. Those are the four base pairs of DNA. Adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. So here's what the computer programmers, DNA writers did. They said, we're going to make, oh, what did they say? We're going to make adenine and, what did they say here? We're going to make adenine and guanine to represent the number 1. We're going to make cytosine and thymine represent the number 0. And so the code says we're going to put adenine here, that's 1, so there's got to be thymine over here, it's going to link them together. And then there's going to be cytosine here, which is 0, and guanine here, which is 0, and we're going to put them together. So here's what it is. They read the code. Here's a 0, here's a 1, here's a 0, here's a 1. In the way they have rewritten this DNA strand, they've now successfully encoded this book into the two strands of DNA. Now, here's what was really interesting to me. Because they're trying to teach themselves how to store large amounts of information. Probably they want to store like everything that you do. We already know that they're working on that. Everything that you do, but boy, it takes up a lot of space, a lot of information. Well, what if they were able to store it on DNA, which is so small that we can't even see it? Our DNA in our bodies contain over 3 billion codes in it, connections of adenine, thymine, over 3 billion. In a little bitty strand that is so small, we can't even see it. So that would be, you think of a box this big that was storing information on DNA. There's no way of guessing how much information can be stored in a box this big. This is huge. Here's what's interesting to me, is that they decided, when they wanted to figure out how to store stuff, they said, let's start with a book. Now that's interesting. If you've seen Jesus Christ DNA in the Holy Bible, you'll know, according to Scripture, DNA is a book. That's how all the genetic scientists figured out how to read the code anyway. They said, you know, it's written like a book. Because here you'll have a sequence of code, which is called a gene. Remember that word. Here's a sequence of code called a gene, and here's another sequence of code called a gene. And how we know that this gene is done talking and this one starts is that there's a sequence of DNA called stop DNA. You know what that is? That's a paragraph marker. That's a period at the end of the sentence. So you have a genetic code here called a gene, and the DNA says stop right here. Just like you send in a telegraph message. This is Mike. Stop. I am coming to New Orleans. Stop. That's what's in DNA. This is like amazing. Let me show it to you in the Bible. Psalm 139, verse 16. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. Look what David said this 3,000 years ago, before they even invented a microscope or a telescope. David said this by inspiration of God. He was saying, in thy book. Who's he talking to? God. In God's book, all my members were written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. And he's even describing the point at which the sperm comes into the egg and the two unite together with the genetic code. Everything about that human being is now written out perfectly. And as that cell develops, it develops fingers, hair, heart, lungs, bones, everything about that. The brain. Even some genetic disorders given to them by their parents is written out already in the book. That's why he said, yet being unperfect. And so here it is, and in thy book all my members were written, which in continuous fashion when as yet there was none of them. David said, it's a book. It's written just like a book. Now, let me show you this one. Isaiah 34:16, seek ye out the book of the Lord. Let's say that that's DNA. And read. No one of these shall fail, none shall want her mate. You gotta love this. Remember, you have two strands of DNA. If I were to take my Bible and I were to go, let's say here, let me find the beginning of the New Testament. Here we are. If we have two sections of the Bible, isn't that interesting? Two strands of DNA. One on this side and one on this side. It says, seek ye out the book of the Lord, none shall want her mate. And so here we have something here that is going to be mated or paired with something over here. How is that going to be done? Well, those of you who study the Bible, you know that this is the Old Testament. This is salvation by keeping the law, which nobody could. Nobody ever has, nobody ever will, except Jesus Christ. But we have in the New Testament salvation by, I believe, what God said. Salvation through faith. They are joined together. By the way, they speak the same thing. Did you know if you read the New Testament, you'll find those same doctrines in the Old Testament? Did you know if you read the Old Testament, you'll find ideas and doctrines that are matched perfectly in the New Testament. And they are joined together. This is what's interesting, because here's what joins the Old Testament with the New Testament. It is called the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 1, 2, 3, 4. These 4 books are the story of the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And they perfectly join together the Old Covenant, which is, everybody has to be perfect if you want to live. Well, it stinks to be us, because now we're all going to die because we're not perfect. To this one says, Everyone can live forever and go to heaven if you just believe now, because we know you can't be perfect. And here's what bridges the two together and joins them together, which is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The four, just like the base pairs, join these two books together. I think this is absolutely amazing. I love to talk about this. Now, remember that word gene. I'm going to show you this. The first time the word book is ever used in the King James Bible, Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. This is the book of the, look at that word there, generations. Do you see the word gene in that word? This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. And so here is the book that God wrote, and it's called a genetic book, DNA, and God wrote the book of Adam. This is the book of the generations, or the genetics, the DNA code of a man by the name of Adam. I think that is just absolutely astonishing and amazing. Now, here's the problem, though. This is the first time in the Old Testament that the word book is used. Let me continue reading in Genesis chapter 5, and I'm going to show you what happens because of the genes of Adam in the Old Testament. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam. And the day when they were created, and Adam lived 130 years, and he begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years. And he begat sons and daughters. In verse 5, and all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Now Adam died, but before he died, he passed on his book of generations down to Seth. And if you read Genesis chapter 5, you'll see that Seth passed his down to, I think, Enos, and then it just goes on down, and you and I basically are the offspring of Adam. We still have the generations of Adam in this flesh body that you and I live in now, which we know is, number one, it's sinful, and number two, we know that it's going to die, because Adam passed his book of generations down to us. Now, let me show you this in the 5th book of the Bible, Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 26. Take this book of the law, put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against thee. And so the book, the Old Testament, is actually witnessing against us. And every time you wake up with an ache or a pain, or you get a disease of some kind, or you break a bone, or you see someone die, you know that it's their flesh, the sinfulness of their flesh and the corruption of their flesh witnessing against them. We die in the same manner that Adam died, that Seth died, that Enos died, that Noah died, Abraham died. And so when we die, all die after that same manner, because we have received the book of the genes of Adam. This is said this way in the New Testament, Galatians chapter 3, verse 10. For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone that continueth not in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. And here again, you remember what I said. Here's the Old Testament. Here's the New Testament. And they actually agree, because we see Galatians saying the same thing as Deuteronomy. They agree, and what draws them together? The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the testimony and the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's what joins them together, just like in your DNA. Now,